Today on Voices for Change, 2 months since George Floyd's death, promises of police reform on Capitol Hill. Where are we now?
There's a lot of work to be done, and to recognize that not all of the chains of slavery have been broken.
Demonizing the entire system will not produce a better result.
Following up with the San Francisco Police Department, a public commitment to take steps towards ending bias and addressing inequality. The chief weighs in.
We have to walk the talk, so I just hope that the public knows that we want to fulfill our obligations.
And honoring the life of a civil rights legend, we celebrate the legacy of Congressman John Lewis.
When you see something that is not right, not just, not fair, you have a moral obligation to say something, to do something.
Welcome to this week's episode of Voices for Change. I'm Greg Lee. It's been 2 months since the world watched in horror as a police officer knelt on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, killing him. His death igniting demands for change in action, issues of systemic racism and social justice again pushed to the forefront of the world's consciousness. We'll spend the next half hour reflecting on the last 2 months, evaluating what has changed and seeing if promises have been kept. Mostly peaceful protests erupted nationwide after Floyd's death. And over the last 60 days, they've continued and grown even stronger. In recent days, much of the peace has been lost. The unrest following President Trump's decision to deploy federal agents to a handful of cities. We have seen violent clashes between protesters, counter-protesters, and police, and some groups who resort to looting and destruction. In some cases, protests against police brutality have led to more instances and questions about use of force. At the center of this message is a demand for police reform. Some cities, states, departments have taken it upon themselves to make changes. On Capitol Hill, House Democrats presented their sweeping reform bill. It included provisions for weakening qualified immunity and a ban on chokeholds and no-knock warrants. It passed easily, but has gone nowhere in the Senate. Republican Senator Tim Scott introduced the GOP version, which incentivized but did not mandate departments banning chokeholds and encouraged transparency. Democrats blocked the bill, effectively leaving any effort at a standstill. Republicans decrying any part of defunding the police or reallocating funds elsewhere.
Demonizing the entire system will not produce a better result, number one. Number two, it's that inconsistent application that erodes confidence in authorities and institutions of authority that leads to chaos. It leads to anarchy. So we can do something about that by putting other people's interests before ourselves as elected officials.
We asked Senator Scott to come on today's show. His office said he was unavailable. We also reached out to Republican Senator Mike Braun. He did not respond. Bay Area Congresswoman Barbara Lee came on our first show as the House prepared to unveil its bill. This week, she gave us her thoughts on where the country is and what more needs to be done.
Congresswoman, thanks for coming back with us. 2 months since George Floyd was killed. And I wanted to first get your thoughts on, has the country advanced in terms of equality? Has it moved forward since that time?
Well, I think since that time, the awareness of systemic racism and how it's manifested in many ways has become more prominent and in the forefront of everyone's mind. I think when you look at the murder of Mr. Floyd and other murders by police officers, when you look at police brutality, when you look at all of the disparities, for example, as it relates to healthcare, COVID-19, more people are beginning to see that there's a lot of work to be done and to recognize that not all of the chains of slavery have been broken in this country.
Congresswoman, on the topic of police reform, the last time we spoke, we were talking about the Justice and Policing Act, George Floyd Policing Act, the House had introduced and went quickly on to pass, but then failed in the Senate. And then Tim Scott's bill was kind of stopped dead in its tracks by Democrats in the Senate. What does it say to Americans that Congress can't reach a meaningful compromise on progress?
I think that what it says is really it's not a compromise that we're seeking. It's a way to work together to make sure that we end the real tragic systemic problems that we see within our justice system, which really, quite frankly, is not a just system. And let me just say, with regard to the Senate bill and Congressman Scott, Senator Scott, that was a feel-good bill. It had no teeth to it. It did not include qualified immunity. I mean, no one is above the law. So how do you compromise on that? And so there are areas where we can cooperate, but you have to have a starting point. And so we're still working. I'm still hopeful that we're going to come to some resolve on this. But let me tell you, there are certain aspects of the Senate bill that it would just have no teeth in it. I mean, when you say that unless someone fears for their lives, unless a police officer fears for his life, that these provisions would not apply. Well, I mean, that's a way to get out of, the real teeth in the bill that would make real reform possible. And so the Senate bill, again, it had some warm and fuzzy provisions. It may have had similar language. When you looked at it, there was nothing there in terms of teeth to make sure there was accountability, transparency, and an end to what Black and brown people have had to deal with for generations in this country.
Senator Scott has said that those talks continue just like you do. Are there certain things that you think maybe Democrats and Republicans can agree on piecemeal before creating this large legislation? Because obviously qualified immunity is a non-starter for you.
Yeah, and we can't piecemeal justice anymore. What we brought and sent over to the Senate, quite frankly, included many bills that had been introduced 25, 30 years ago. And so piecemealing is not going to work. Yes, we can talk about phasing in strategy, which provisions we think should be implemented right away. I mean, there are tactical and strategic conversations that could and should take place. But when it comes to piecemealing, we can't piecemeal, again, justice, and we're not going to allow that. But I am very, very hopeful that both our senators and members of Congress can come together to kind of walk through how to come to bring forth a bill that everyone can vote for.
Are we moving in the right direction?
Slowly. And I say slowly because I tell you, I raised two phenomenal young Black boys, now great, beautiful Black men who have children, right? And I have two grandsons. The conversations that Black parents were having then, my explaining to my sons what to do in case the police stop them. Don't go here, don't go there, don't worry about being humiliated. I'll take care of you later. You have to know when you're in danger. These conversations are still taking place. And that should not be. That's, I say, un-American. And so I remember also how the Black Panther Party, right, in Oakland, California, really stood down the police on behalf of the community, because police murders, police brutality that was, of course, perpetrated by the FBI and the Department of Justice was ongoing then. And so when you look at the historical context, we come some distance, but no, we've got a long way to go. And so right now, that's why we can't tinker around the edges and we can't compromise on life and death. And it's time that we do the right thing and really complete the work of liberty and justice for everyone. And that means that Black lives matter.
There's calls for change that I think are very positive, that at the end of all this, we're going to be in a better place.
Coming up after the break, a candid conversation with San Francisco Police Chief Bill Scott. We evaluate how the department has responded to a commitment to reform.
Even when those things are fixed, and here's what I want people to hear clearly. Reform never ends. Reform is a process of continuous improvement.
That was San Francisco Police Chief Bill Scott when he came on our show back on June 7th. He committed to reform, a change in policies, and to combat bias in his own department. We followed up with the chief to find out what steps he's taken and what more needs to be done.
In your own words, talk about steps the department, San Francisco PD, has taken in terms of justice and progress.
Well, yeah, thanks for asking that question, because I do think it's really important that everybody was outraged about what they saw, and that's understandable. But the next step is, what are we doing about it, and what are we doing to make things better? So some of the things that we're doing here in San Francisco, we implemented policy changes since that time, and some of them are significant. We've changed our booking photo release policy, which was a big deal for us, in that we no longer release booking photos except for a couple of situations. If there's a danger to the community, and that booking photo will help resolve that situation. And the second is if a person is at risk, or that person whose booking photo is subject to be released is at risk. There have been many occasions where a booking photo is released, the person is not found guilty of anything. Those photos, particularly right now with social media, internet, those photos are out there. And oftentimes people can be harmed by those photos in terms of, job prospects or just their reputation. When you see images over and over again of, certain individuals, particularly Black males, Hispanic males, the mind starts to believe that that's what the suspect looks like. And, we hope to try to do our part to turn that around.
Chief, when we talk about policy, Mayor Breed released her roadmap for new police reforms, and it seems like stuff that you agreed with and have taken steps towards. Tell me about the major points in that.
The root of the national conversation right now is how do we as a country come to grips with some of the issues? And we're talking about historical systemic issues, institutionalized racism and the like. One of the mayor's reform initiatives is to audit our testing procedures to determine whether or not at every level of testing, whether we have the right implements or the right testing procedures to really detect who are the best candidates for not only to be a police officer, but to be promoted. We basically froze our tests, which is a big deal for us, because we need to fulfill those supervisory and management positions, because that good oversight is a part of what good police departments have to do. But we're willing to make that sacrifice for the sake of a better police department, and hopefully to address some of those issues.
Chief, we know you submitted changing the use of force policy, and the police commission has been working on that.
Before, we didn't evaluate just the drawing and exhibiting of a firearm. For instance, if you pulled your gun out of the holster, but you didn't point it at anybody intentionally, that was not evaluated. Now that will be evaluated. And the reason that's important is our policy was clear even before this change that there's only certain conditions where you can pull your firearm out. But if we're not capturing that data, a lot of people who have been stopped and have seen officers pull their firearm out, they remember that for a lifetime. And even whether or not we pointed at them, it's information that we have to track, that we have to understand those occurrences in which that's happening. And when we have that data, then we can train to where we need to get better. So that's a big thing. We've expanded the reporting of use of force. Before, we only reported lower level force. Like if I had to wrestle you to the ground to get you in handcuffs, if you weren't hurt, in our policy, that was not reportable. Now, any force used to overcome resistance, regardless of whether or not there's an injury, that's going to be a reportable force. Again, it's capturing a bigger picture so we can use that data to get better and make sure that we start to change the narrative on some of these disparities. We've written actually language in the policy about not sitting people on the ground, known as curb sitting. We still have the ability to prone people out when the circumstances justify that. But when and if you do that, it has to be documented. You have to justify your actions in a report, and that will be evaluated. And also, if and when you do it, we want the people to be picked up off of the ground as soon as possible. And, we're not just going to leave human beings on the ground to lay there while we do our business. So these are things that really go to our values. And it's about, we come into contact with people oftentimes on their worst days when they make some of their worst decisions of their lives. And we have to do our jobs, but we have to do our jobs with dignity. And this is about treating people with dignity and respect. And, with this term that we use in the San Francisco Police Department about safety with respect, respect has to mean something, and it has to mean something tangible. So some of these changes will help us make sure that we live up to these ideals.
About 65% of people being stopped by SFPD being people of color. What do those numbers say to you, and what can be done better?
Well, the numbers say that we have a lot of work to do, first of all. I mean, that disparity, even when you account for violent crime, even when you account for some of the things that serve to explain why the numbers are what they are, is still disproportional. And we've worked with social psychologists in the area. We work with academic research partners. I just got off the phone with one of them about this very issue before our interview. And we know that we have a lot of work to do. And it gets back to what our earlier part of this discussion about trying to turn back as much as we can do this, the stereotyping and the things like that feed into the implicit biases that I believe drive some of what we're talking about. The fine rates for white is almost the same as it is for blacks, which means that we made progress in that area. The inference being, it goes to say that there's less of a likelihood that bias and stereotyping are the drivers of the stops. So, I'm happy with that progress, but it doesn't, for any stretch of the imagination, say that we don't have more work to do, because that's progress, but there's a whole lot of more work to do because the disparities are still alarming.
Every Sunday, our goal is to dig deeper into the important and urgent issues facing our community and beyond. This week, we're talking to stars of stage and screen about using their platform to call for social justice and fighting systemic racism in their own craft.
We have to make sure that once this is done, is that we have to try to make change occur when it comes to police brutality. And what I'm saying is that there has to be a deterrent.
Oscar-winning actor Jamie Foxx joined San Francisco leaders at City Hall last month during a protest condemning racial inequality in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. He called on other celebs to speak up and take action. A few weeks later, some of the stars of The Last Black Man in San Francisco did just that, joining a protest on the Bay Bridge. And on Juneteenth, rapper, director, and Oakland native Boots Riley called for people to join the rally and shut down the Port of Oakland. Legendary Danny Glover also addressed the crowd by phone.
You are the next generation. You are right here using your voices and using your feeling, using the extraordinary power that you have.
Coleman Domingo knows something about using his voice. The award-winning actor, director, and playwright is well known for his role on Fear the Walking Dead. But his career is full of roles shining a light on Black history, with credits in Oscar-winning films Selma, If Beale Street Could Talk, and The Birth of a Nation. And in his personal life, he's an activist, fighting for social justice.
Coleman, thanks for joining us. You've played so many powerful roles in your career. Selma, The Scottsboro Boys, If Beale Street Could Talk. Can you talk about the importance of those roles in the frame of the experience of Black people in America in history and today?
Well, you know what? I've been a part of these incredible projects. And the first one that comes to mind is Selma. And I think the greatest thing we can do as artists is be a part of things that that will be a part of systemic change. And I knew by shining a light on Selma, and I was really so proud with what Ava DuVernay did with that film and David Oyelowo. Every producer was on board to tell the story. And so I think, I look at, something like that, like I think it was a Paramount film, that it did start, it wasn't only just, I believe it was everyone's responsibility to sort of get that right. Same with like If Beale Street Could Talk or The Scottsboro Boys. The Scottsboro Boys in particular was written by Kander and Ebb, writers who can, and librettists who can do anything they wanted to. but they chose to tell the story of 9 African-American teenage boys who were wrongly accused of rape in 1931. They believed that that story mattered. I have been telling people of late, because I know that there's a lot of questions sometimes in the arts on like, who can tell whose story? And I fully believe that, the story of the Scottsboro Boys, it was out there. It was, intellectual property. And the choice to tell that story and to tell it in the way that we did, in the framework that we did, I thought was one of the most incredible things that I'm so proud of in my entire career.
Coleman, you wrote a really powerful column in Deadline last month, and you said there's no time for easy anymore. Tell me why it's crucial and imperative for actors like you to continue to lift up your voices in this moment.
As you examine and you move further in your career and you have a larger voice and a platform, and once you have a platform, what do you do with it? And so I think that was the questions that we were wrestling with Lights Out, Nat King Cole, where it seems it's wild. We wrote this about 2 years ago, but I also felt that it was no time to be easy to be, because I think silence is complicity. And I had to examine my own as well, how much I spoke out, how much I talked about politics or what was meaningful, not just the power of being an entertainer, but also understanding that you have a true platform. And so to put out there truly what you feel, and that is actually, it's a liberating thing. It's not an easy thing. And I think it's necessary. And I think it's necessary for every single person to be a part of the conversation. No one gets to take a back seat to this anymore. No one gets to say, oh, I can't talk about that because I'm white and I feel uncomfortable. Especially my colleagues who feel that way, I push them to say, you have to actually be, if you're an ally, truly prove it. Prove your merit. Put yourself on the line. Put your career on the line. Put your followers on the line. And I think that's what we have to do. I know a lot of my followers, they may have voted differently or believe something differently, but at the end of the day, we're also human. I want to show what connects us. So for my money as an artist, I'm saying, if you love me, you tune into the things I'm a part of, you support me and say, oh, I love Victor Strand. Oh, I love when you do that movie. When you love me, love all of me. And I'm going to show you exactly who I am because I think that brings us closer together.
You are a buyer. How do I know? Because I am a closer.
Obviously, a lot of Fear the Walking Dead fans out there. In that role, as a leading man and a person of color in a show like that, how important is it to show diversity and to be in a position for you? And what message does that send to the next generation of actors and playwrights?
Greatly. It means greatly to me. I think when Dave Erickson presented me with that role, 6 seasons ago, I was very incredibly impressed that the writing had so much depth and complexity, because it was pretty usual to me that, they wanted me to play a trope of some sort and I wasn't interested. So I sort of stayed away from television for a long time. My work had stayed in the theater where I felt like I was more useful. And then this role comes along, which is an examination of our humanity. And you have a character who's complex, like Victor Strand, who is not, I think what's important, and it's even the way I write, he's not necessarily, he is absolutely an African-American man. He is, I don't believe in colorblind. I believe that, specifically the way they wrote him, they didn't write him with any sort of color in mind. But I always say, Victor Strand is absolutely an African-American man, and everything he's done is in response to that. And it's important to show that complexity with characters. And so I'm glad that there's been more characters like that on television. I think it's very important for us not to only just be actors. We have to be producers. We have to be financiers. We have to have, I have my own production company because it's in response to the industry. I have to, I can't complain about it. I have to build it and I have to be a part of it and I have to be at the head of my own table and actually saying, oh, this is what matters.
Coleman, you were part of a letter titled Dear White American Theater, and It's basically calling out systemic racism in the theater industry. What needs to happen for things to be better and to get better?
For things to be better and get better, we have to root out racism wherever we can. And I think with the Dear White American Theater, the artists are responding to the systemic racism in the theater in particular. And, I feel like we have to meet it wherever we are, wherever we work, whatever institutions, you name it, high, low, we have to hit it from every corner.
we are rolling out a mini-series on ethnic studies so that students can see positive representations of themselves, of African Americans who contributed to the state, of Latinos, of individuals of Asian Pacific Islander descent, of Native Americans.
California Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond is addressing the issues of racial justice in public schools with a new ethnic studies curriculum. Thurmond also launched implicit bias training for all of the department's 2,500 employees. For more on educational equity, I spoke to San Francisco State professor Jeff Duncan Andrade.
When you see the moves that the California Department of Education is taking to deal with racial injustice, tell me your thoughts.
To be frank with you, I think that policy doesn't work. People work. And it's not that you'd never catch me saying policy doesn't matter, because of course policy matters. I taught under No Child Left Behind. I've been a teacher and a school leader in Oakland for nearly 30 years now. So I know that policy matters, and there's certain policies that emerge that make it easier for us to do the kind of work that needs to be done in schools to support the most wounded ones. And there's policies that make that work much more challenging to do. So I think that that it does matter what kind of policy Tony and his team and the kind of broader set of politicians that find themselves interested in the state of public education in California. It does matter what they do. But at the end of the day, it really is about what kind of resources and support and innovation and commitment can we make at local levels to allow people that are actually going to have to execute on the policy to be able to do that, and to do that in a way that allows them the space, time, and resource, not just to fail, but to learn from their failure. Are policymakers going to finally get out of the chair and get on the ground and really spend time with young people and families and educators that have been doing this for a long, long time, but are very rarely brought to the table to talk about what kind of policy we would need to actually move the project forward?
Professor, you talk a lot about building confidence of students, and how important is that when you're talking about closing the achievement gap, specifically for Black and Brown students in the public school system?
What's so beautiful about the Black Lives Matter movement and all the kind of collective push around this is that they have been and are continuing to say, no, you're not going to individualize this. This is structural, okay? And the same is true for schools. And so SEL has become about, well, let's locate the problem in the individual child, and then let's fix the child. Well, the child's not broken. The system's broken. The society's broken. And so you can try all you want to fix a child. The child is simply a mirror into our society. They're reflecting back to you what we've done to children, what we've done to Black people, what we've done to Indigenous people for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's what's showing up. That's the woundedness. That's not broken. Children are not broken. The central purpose and tenet of a public education system in a pluralistic multiracial democracy should be wellness. That every child should leave school every day more well than when they showed up. Now, in order to really do that and not have it be what SEL has become, which is a program that you tap into to fix the broken ones, right? But instead to say, no, this is institution-wide, tip to finish, edge to edge, top to bottom. This is what we do in this school. We do youth wellness. These investments in schools, right, aren't just an investment in an individual child. They're an investment in transforming our society.